Hi, my name is Lucia Botero, and today I'm going to present the life of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So, we're going to begin with a really important quote that she says, and it's each mortal stands alone. This is what she says on the Congress in 1892. That single line is going to capture her whole life thesis that every human being, male or female, must captain their own ship through unknown waters. Life. Today, I will inform you about Elizabeth Cady Stanton's rhetorical skills, life, and the continued relevance of her speech, The Solitude of Self, highlighting how her words continue to speak up into modern struggles for gender equality and personal dignity. She converted her thoughts into a movement that changed the whole American democracy. She was the intellectual engine who wrote the speeches of Susan B. Anthony, of whom we will talk about later. Susan B. Anthony spoke all those speeches, delivered those speeches in front of the whole country. By the end of this presentation, I hope you will hear Stanton's words echo whenever civic rights are discussed, because her fight over gender still shapes our overpower, voice, and belonging. She was born on November 12, 1815, in Johnston, New York. She was raised by her father, Daniel Cady, a wealthy judge, so she was really privileged. She saw from a very early age her father ruling laws that excluded women. But Stanton's rebellion really began with a heartbreak. At 11, after her only brother died, she tried to console her father, but he sighed, "Oh, my daughter, I wish you were a boy." That started the revolution in Stanton's head. Determined to prove worth, she was top of her class in Greek and geometry at Johnstown's Academy, and then at Troy Female Seminary. Those subjects were bared to women in all colleges, but she was wealthy enough, let's put it that way, to take them. And she nailed it. But the real detonator came from her father's law library, when she saw, when she was just a teen, statutes declaring married women civilly dead. Imagine her, a teenager, slicing through those pages in fury. By 24, she married Henry Stanton, who was an abolitionist, and she insisted that the word obey be cut out from the vows. That was her first public protest. They went into their honeymoon to London to a very special trip in 1840, in which they expected to attend the World Anti-Slavery Convention. Without knowing, this convention will become a turning point. Stanton and Lucretia Mott, Stanton's friend, were moved to a curtained gallery. They were seen but unheard, with no chance of participating due to their sex. They made a pact: hold a women's convention back at home. 8 years later, in Seneca Falls, New York, Stanton drafts the Declaration of Sentiments. She borrows Jefferson Cadi's "all men and women are created equal." And then she will be listing 18 grievances: no vote, no property, no college, no voice in law, and the most daring in Resolution 9, women's suffrage. Newspapers howl, but the manifesto seeds a movement that will spawn 3/4 of a century. In 1851, Stanton meets Susan B. Anthony, and history gains its most formidable duo. Stanton's writes, often in a kitchen table surrounded by 7 children, while Anthony travels the world and thousands of miles delivering those words. Together they created the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, and earlier the Women's Loyal National League, which gathers 400,000 signatures against slavery, and that was a petition record. Anthony said, "I forget the Thunderbolts," but Stanton fired them. So they were the duo. Their complementary partnership kept women's rights on the Congress docket for 50 years, proving that collaboration multiplies impact. But she doesn't stop at manifestos. She will write then 6 volumes of History of Women's Suffrage. That was the era's data backbone. And she even dares to reread scriptures in the Woman's Bible, exposing patriarchal bias. Now, her rhetorical talent. So, how does she delivers the speech, and how well is she known for? So, she weaponized language itself. She started with the Declaration of Sentiments by mirroring the cadence of Jefferson Declaration. So she forced Americans to confront their founding creed in a new mirror. So every he has, she will turn it into a he she has. So indictment exposed a democracy blind spot, while the refrain all men and women are created equal, that was a linguistic jailbreak. Using the nation's own rhetoric to show the gap between men and women. Fast forward to 1892 and her address, The Solitude of Self, where she went from collective revolution to personal autonomy. She insists that each soul navigates life's storms alone, therefore must be armed with equal rights. She even does some biblical echoes, Shakespearean allusion, and nautical and military metaphors, so men will understand a little bit better. Pulling heart, mind, and moral instinct into delivering these speech, but never too sentimental. Behind these masterpieces she wrote and declared, we can see Aristotle's 3 proofs: ethos, pathos, and logos. So her ethos comes from decades of leadership. Pathos from describing vivid image of women with clear metaphors, like women that a girl who doesn't receive education is like a girl with eyes put out. And her logos with a simple syllogism: responsibility without right is contradiction. So now we're going to dive a little bit deep into each section. So for her ethos, that's building credibility, we know that persuasion begins with trust. So people need to trust her. But Stanton's credibility was crystal clear. In the leadership fields, she chaired the Seneca Falls Convention at 32. She was the president of the National Women's Suffrage Association, and she testified before Congress. That was a visible proof that she is willing to take a risk that she's asking other people to take. Second, on scholarships, 6 volumes of history, women's suffrage, hundreds of essays, and the Woman's Bible. Her moral compass never really turned. She condemned slavery, championing temperance, or fighting divorce reform. The principle was identical. Human dignity deserved legal protection. Susan B. Anthony called Stanton the brain of our cause, while newspapers that were often hostile admitted that her arguments were unanswerable in logic. Finally, her meticulous research habits, like footnotes, statistic, and comparative law, signaled an intellect that preferred evidence other than rhetoric alone. Together, these elements formed an ethos so strong that even opponents had to engage her ideas, not dismiss her person. For her pathos, that's the emotional appeal, she knew that she couldn't make all emotional speech only. She never relied on sentiments alone, but she understood that feeling primed the mind for reason. Listen to her pathos. The mother alone in childbirth denied a doctor because she cannot control her wages, or the tax-paying widow funding roads that she has no voice in shaping, and the chilling image of girls barred from school as if their eyes had been put out. These metaphors bypass abstraction and strike the heart of the soul of an audience. And then she's going to pivot carefully, without no one noticing, to logos, so the logic of it all. Her core syllogism is simple. Society already assigns women adult responsibilities. And in a republic, responsibility without rights is a contradiction. And guess what? The USA is a republic. Therefore, rights must be followed. She fortifies that logic with vivid analogies. Sailors forced to steer without charts, or even soldiers sent to battle or war unarmed. Absurdities that legislators could not ignore and that they understood perfectly. By mixing raw empathy into strong, well-formed arguments, Stanton's produced something that was both moving and irrefutable, turning audience from sympathetic listeners into politic allies. Now, her legacy, which is a really enduring legacy, it's pretty extended. So, we'll start with the immediate impact. So, when she died in 1902, a few years later, in 1913, her words were still alive. So people marched on Pennsylvania Avenue in 1913 when suffragists carried banners quoting her declaration, proof that she provided the ideological compass steering the movement toward the 19th Amendment. Beyond that immediate victory, her insistence on a self-sovereign individual gave birth to many feminists like de Beauvoir or Betty Friedan. They both echo Stanton's claim that citizenship begins with ownership of one's body. So, what Stanton called the solitude of self, de Beauvoir rephrased it as becoming a subject, and Freeman is going to recast it as breaking the problem with no name. Finally, the cultural resonance. So from now, from LGBTQ plus pride marches to global girls' education campaigns, activists still cite the solitude of self to argue that every person, regardless gender, race, or orientation, deserves the civic right and the civic tools to navigate life's storm. So Stanton's voice continues to supply thousands of people who are still fighting for equality. So, in conclusion, Elizabeth Cady Stanton once said that each person must steer their own boat through life's storms. She showed us the tools we need. Learning is the map, fair laws are the steering wheel, and clear words are the wind in our sails. Her 1848 declaration broke the silence around women's rights, and her later speeches helped bring us the vote in 1920. She was not perfect. She sometimes left people out, but her story proves change is possible when we speak up. Our job now is to keep the journey going because it's not over. We need to make sure that every person, no matter their race, class, or gender, has the same tools to guide their life. So take the wheel, talk, teach, write, organize, vote, and the best way to honor Stanton's life is through action that open doors for everyone who still wants a change.